welcome. We've got 16 participants, including our panelists. This is Cast a Spell. And I just wanted to say a word because this Cast a Spell was kind of something that I was working on with another committee member with When Words Collide. And honestly, I met her a couple of times. We had great fun. And then I never saw her again. And then I went to look up her poetry, and I found out that she had suddenly passed away. So I just wanted to say it's with great sadness that we announce the passing of Darlene Luca, who's been sitting on the poetry committee panel for a number of years and in charge of our poetry programming. So it's a bit of a shock. So I just wanted to say her words, her final goodbye message is be there for one another. It doesn't have to be perfect. Don't judge, and build your caring community. And as somebody who's, just really on the edge of coming out of obscurity and into maybe a light of some kind, I just want to say that it's a beautiful thing that she's done, and it was her idea that we call this panel Cast a Spell. So with that, I just wanted to say, here you are. It's Cast a Spell, and I'll just say we've got Rowan, we've got Josephine, we've got Amy. Amy's on her way back, but she's here. And Moss, and we have some amazing stuff to talk about casting a spell and how it relates to poetry. So I don't know do you guys think I should go ahead and read what the actual panel consists of, or do you think we should just launch right in and say how much fun casting a spell is, just like poetry? What do you think? Yeah? Okay, Rowan. So give us a one-liner about yourself. You're an author, and you practice spell casting.
I've been a witch my entire life, and I'm old now. But I have been in many rituals and many gatherings and things, and I come from a very Celtic family that love to tell stories and have a lot of long oral traditions, and a lot of it's poetry. So I'm here to add the witchy and spell casting flavor to the group. So it's nice to meet everybody.
Nice to meet you, Rowan. Josephine, you've been a poet for quite some time, and it's very magical for you. And I've been on a couple panels with you. So why don't you introduce yourself?
Okay, Josephine Larray from Calgary, Alberta. By profession, I'm a teacher. By passion and calling, I'm a poet and a writer. And what really intrigues me about language is its power to evoke and its power to create worlds. So I'm coming at this more from the perspective of a poet and language.
Awesome, awesome. And Amy, now, am I right? Are you an agent?
No, I'm not.
Okay, you're a poet, but you're also
also an editor. Yeah, so I'll just jump into my introduction. So my name is Amy Leblanc. I'm also a poet from Calgary, Alberta. Currently completing my master's in English and creative writing at UFC. And I'm also managing editor at Filling Station magazine. So it's kind of my side hustle right now. And a lot of my poetry really draws on botanical imagery. And I really love the magic of botanicals. So that's basically what I'm going to talk about today, is kind of making some of the everyday ordinary things magical. So you're like flowers and poisons and various things that you kind of find out and about. So that's me.
That's incredible. We're going to have so much fun. Okay, and Moss,
Yes.
I just recently found out you've also got a book published, and you're an author.
Yes. So I'm from Vancouver, Moss Wheeland. This is my baby, my green baby, Greyhawk of Terrapin. And it's more of a tween fantasy, but it's a social criticism about Vancouver and what's going on here. And my interest in poetry, I'm coming from Tolkien. I'm coming from the creation that's in the Silmarillion, the singing into being of enchantment versus magic, which should be interesting to sort of get into. It's like, is there a difference? Is it the same thing? Tolkien said There's enchantment, which is connected to wonder, and then there's magic, which is connected to power. So let's argue.
Wow. So now we've had the two words of power in poetry. So definitely, definitely. So Rowan, I understand that spellcasting is a basic concept in paganism and Wiccan. And can you tell me how does that work out for you in terms of the connection with poetry?
Well, words are very, very magical. Everybody knows this. And as a writer, and as somebody that's gifted with writing and gifted with a love of writing, you know, any good witch knows that you can send a message to someone. The prettier the message, the easier the message is to read, the more influential the message is. There is a reed that many pagans use and schools. It's called the Wiccan Reed, and I'll just say it really quick. It's not very fast. It's imbibe the Wiccan law you must, in perfect love, in perfect trust. 8 words the Wiccan Reed fulfill, and harm ye none, do as you will. And ever mind the law of 3, what thine sends out comes back to thee. Mind your heart with love in your heart, and merry you met and merry you part. So for us to work together, especially if we work in larger groups, I tend to be a solitary, and I have a smaller group that I work with because I'm kind of, I'm an author, so I'm in my office a lot, held up. It helps you when you are casting a spell to get into the mood of the spell, and if you have a poem that's written for the spell, it's a lot easier for a coven to remember a poem that rhymes than it is to go into some long, Gettysburg Address, which doesn't get everybody in the mood. Part of spellcasting is to get somebody's mind lined up with your mind, to help them feel what you feel. And as human beings, we've been singing since we were cave people. We've been painting these things on the wall since the dawn of time, and all the nursery rhymes and everything like that. So that's what spellcasting is. It is making a beautiful work of art, some poetry, then you're in the spell.
Okay, I'm going to get you to repeat what you just said. It's making, because you froze up on us.
Oh, I'm sorry. It is, when you are gearing a spell up, it is making a beautiful work of art. I mean, I brought my book of shadows along, and this is a very old book that I have, and I've used it since I was a little girl. So it's very important for us to write these words down and to make them something you're going to remember, like a wedding vow. So that's what, spells are to us. And I don't think I've ever seen a spell that doesn't rhyme, actually.
What do you think, Josephine?
Mute myself. Thanks. It's very interesting. And in fact, when I was doing a project for an oral presentation, and I was looking at the origins of poetry to see when poetry became a genre. And the reason why poetry exists is because, exactly as Rowan was saying, it's easier to memorize something if it has a certain rhythm, if it has a certain cadence, if it has a certain end rhyme. So it goes back to storytelling, but wanting to remember and wanting to retell. I put notes on the computer, so I'm going to just open up my notes to make sure that I say everything that I had prepared for today. In a sense, how do we learn language? Well, as infants, or even if we're aborting a second language later on in life, at first we hear and we learn and we repeat sounds and words that might not make particular sense to us because that's part of the learning process. So I was thinking of Lewis Carroll, who wrote Alice in Wonderland through the Looking Glass, but he also wrote Jabberwocky. I don't need to read the whole thing, but I just want you to feel the power in Jabberwocky. Just a moment. All right. So it is written in English, but there's probably going to be things you don't recognize. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogroves, and the mulmy raths outgrabe. Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the Jubjub bird, and shun the frumious bundersnatch. He took his vorpal sword in hand, long time the maxim foe he sought. So rested he by the tum-tum tree and stood a while in thought. So I'm not going to continue reading that, but you can see the power of language. So even if we don't know what those words mean, we can feel that. And as Rowan said, we hear the power of spell from the time that we're little in our lullabies, in our nursery rhymes, in fee, fi, fo, fum, and mirror, mirror on the wall. Just going to go back to my notes. When my youngest was not even 2, she could read, but really she wasn't reading. She was reciting from memory every single page of a nursery rhyme collection. Each peach, pear, plum, I spy Tom Thumb in the cupboard, I spy Mother Hubbard, and on it went. So the power of poetry, the power of words to evoke. I actually chose a poem which I don't actually think was meant to, was written in terms of creating a spell, but what I really, really like about this poem is it's kind of a dream sequence. So while I open it, it was written by Margaret Atwood, and it is called Variation on the Word Sleep. I would like to watch you sleeping, which may not happen. I would like to watch you sleeping. I would like to sleep with you, to enter your sleep as its smooth dark wave slides over my head, and walk with you through that lucent, wavering forest of blue-green leaves with its watery sun and 3 moons, towards the cave where you must descend, towards your worst fear. I would like to give you the silver branch, the small white flower, the one word that will protect you from the grief at the center of your dream, from the grief at the center. I would like to follow you up the long stairway again and become the boat that would row you back carefully, a flame in 2 cupped hands to where your body lies beside me, and you enter it as easily as breathing in. I would like to be the air that inhabits you for a moment only. I would like to be that unnoticed and that necessary. So in that poem, there isn't really an emphasis on rhyme or repetition or rhythms, but the images that are evoked are very dreamlike. Am I okay for time to share one more? Yes, very, very powerful. Yeah.
I think we're gonna give Amy an opportunity here. She's got some great stuff. Now, you as your experience with poetry, you have something about botanicals.
Yeah, and I probably should have mentioned this in my introduction of myself, but I actually just launched my first book as well. Forgot about it for a moment. This is my debut poetry collection that just came out at the beginning of COVID times. So that's been interesting. But a big part of writing this book was looking at botanical imagery, like you said, Jennifer, and looking at the ways that it can become magical. What I'm really curious about is this idea of sympathetic magic, like the idea of making things magical by association. So taking something that isn't inherently magical by itself, but you put it in a context that makes it magical. So if I have time, I'd love to read 2 poems from the collection. I actually have a section in the collection called Spells and Herbs, which is specifically about magical botanicals and things like that.
Awesome.
So the first poem is called A Spell for a Husband. And this poem came about when I discovered something called the Satyr Square, which is pretty common in witchcraft circles, but it's a palindrome. It's a 5-word Latin palindrome. So I don't know if this will show up in the right direction, but it's that middle section there where all the words line up together. Right. So we'll read it as part of the poem, but it's Sator, Arepo, Tenet, Opera, Rotas. So whatever direction you read it in, you get the same order of letters. And the idea there was that the repetition of the letters, kind of like we're talking about the repetition of poetry, the repetition of the letters would confuse the devil if he were ever trying to pick apart what was happening here in this incantation. And cool. I just thought that was so and it shows up a lot in Pennsylvania Dutch communities, just various places. So this poem is called Spell for a Husband. Take juniper, oil, rue, and turpentine to place in a steaming kettle. When the hairs stand on end and organs rattle in their cages, write Sator a repo, tenet opera rotas on a piece of paper and feed it to your husband in a cup of warm milk and sugar. Drive wood through the doors like stakes through soil, but know if he has made a home, he will not leave. Grip carrots and parsnip roots until they bruise and bleed, then grease the legs crosswise. Tie the cloth of a man who has died in July to the elm tree and wait for the trampling hooves of horses above your head. And then I just have one more that I'd love to read that's a bit more botanical focused. And this one's a good example of the sympathetic magic, because there was this really neat article from CBC about creeping bellflower, which are those really lovely, very noxious purple flowers that are sprouting up all over Alberta. You can't kill them.
They're in my backyard.
And you need to put a tarp over them for like 2 winters if you want them to go. So this article just had such interesting language to it. So I took it and I wrote an anagram with those words to kind of make it into something a little bit more magical, because the magical language was already there. So this poem is called Noxious. They sprout uninvited, spontaneous blooms, more wildflower than creeping zombie weed. Nearly decorative and uninitiated, the creeping bellflower is dormant for years. All perennials in their path can kill. Undead and tall from the cold black earth, the weeds choke back to life in the spring. Their beauty warns, leave these innocent wildflowers. Stately stems, even chemicals and charmed gardeners can't kill. Don't be fooled by the creeping lie, the heavy machinery, the trumpet shape. Other impossible blooms often can and will kill.
Wow.
Those are my 2 poems. Yeah, I think that's it for me. But those are just examples of kind of the magical uses that I like to bring into my poetry. I'm really fascinated by poisonous plants. I don't grow any, but I find them really interesting because there's so much kind of folklore influence and history behind them. But thank you for listening to my poems. That's it for me today.
Wow. It's so amazing. Everyone. Okay, Moss. You had an interesting take on Token.
Right. I'd like to go to Tom Bombadil. And with Tom Bombadil, everything he says, I think it's metered, but it definitely rhymes, and there's this rhythm. And there's interesting things that are said about Tom Bombadil, that he's perhaps the most powerful being in Middle Earth, and that he's perhaps one of the oldest. But I was thinking about the fertility and the cultivation that happens around him, and that in his sphere of influence, he's kind of like the border between the Shire with its naivety and wonderful innocence, and then this grotesque, older, adult world on the other side. And here's Tom Bombadil going along singing, hey, ho, Tom Bombadil, oh. And then trees, evil trees, they stop and, eject hobbits, barrow wights, let hobbits go. And then the barrow, or the wight runs off screaming. And so in the chanting, in the enchanting, there is this power that happens. And it's in contrast to the destructive anti-nature of the other side. There we go.
Wow. That's incredible. Okay. So, Josephine, did I see you're doing a thing here? Did you have something?
Oh, when I snap, it means I really like what I'm hearing.
Oh, okay. That's
Yes.
great. I
And
didn't know that.
Moss just said something that really I'd never thought about, but chant, the word to chant, and then an enchantment, and just how those things, they come from the same roots. Cantare, which is to sing in Italian, so it goes back to the Latin.
The cantos, yeah.
Yes.
And Rowan, you had said something about the oral tradition, and also Josephine had talked about the oral tradition. So that's really, it's a history thing for all of us. And like one of my favorite stories for my kids has always been, I think I can, right? And then that's sort of a, you have to repeat it, right? You have to say, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can, and that third time is the magic.
Yeah.
So are there do you guys have any experience with repetition?
I do have a poem where I was trying to use the language, the rhythms, repetition, as opposed to imagery. So I could share that if you'd like. Yeah.
Oh, sure, yeah. Does anybody else have a repetition concept? Although I have to say, Rowan, when you said the power, what was it, the Wiccan rule, that gave me goosebumps.
Yes.
It's an
Is
old
there
one. It's an oldie but goldie.
Do you have another one?
I'll let Josephine go first.
Okay.
Then I'll kick in after that.
Okay. I call it thistle. Thistle, hustle, gristle, muscle, epistle, tussle, chug and churn and feed and burn, wheel and wind, reprieve and sin. The earth turns at the same pace. It is we who accelerates. Missile, muscle, bristle, scuffle, whistle, rustle. We churn and burn and wield and yearn, faster, faster, bites, kilobytes, terabyte, ammonite, gigabyte, troglodyte, fight, flight, might, right, the world turning, turning as we accelerate, computate, titillate, abdicate, aggravate, demonstrate, gravitate, complicate, correlate, scintillate, populate, and the world turning, turning as we accelerate.
Wow, that was totally magical.
Thank you. It's not typically my style. Typically, my style is more like a narrative, lyrical kind of poem. But I think for what I was trying to convey, the rhyme, the
And
repetition, the rhythms really
and a real
captured it for me.
pace, like a real pace and flow to it.
Yeah,
And I think that probably goes back to like what when you first said that first poem, Rowan, I got the pace and flow of it, that they're, to not just the memory, but the words and what they meant.
Mm.
and it's funny because that was a definitely pre-COVID poem, and I feel like what COVID has done is it's caused the world to stop and think and reflect, and maybe things will be different now because of COVID.
Oh, totally different. Ron, did you find it?
I am going to share something kind of personal, but we just recently did a very powerful spell with my group because I have a wonderful girlfriend who just, they diagnosed her with spinal cancer.
Oh my gosh.
So the whole group got together and to share in how much poetry means to us as a group. This is a big ritual. Obviously, it's very close to all of us, and it meant she's a coven sister. We call corners. Some pagans call corners, some pagans don't. I think every group is slightly different. And it's, I'm kind of the leader because I've been a witch for so long, and I come from a long line of Scottish witches, and so they kind of say, you do it. We will actually repeat the corners every time we call a corner. So when we call the north corner, that's the earth corner, it's the corner of solidity, it's the corner of benevolence, it's the corner of the Father. We will all stop at that corner and repeat, so mote it be 3 times when we enter that circle and when we call that corner. We ring a bell, say it 3 times, and we do that for every corner. Part of the poetry that goes into spellcasting is also to draw the powers of nature to us. And animals speak differently than we do, and spirits speak differently than we do. Humans tend to blather on and on and on and on and on. Animals speak through, many different body languages. They speak through many different expressions. And I believe that we're all just guessing of how the spirits speak. But it's been laid down for centuries and centuries and centuries that if you want to talk to somebody on the other side of the veil, you repeat yourself, and usually it's a 3 thing. So we would say, come Father into the circle, and all the girls would say, welcome Father into the circle, welcome Father into the circle 3 times. That binds the circle. And it also is, again, you're calling to something that's spiritual. You're calling to something that's ephemeral. So I got my little kid laughing here on my notifications. Hold on, let me move that. So that is how we set up a spell. And in any spell, there can be different poems throughout each spell. This was a big spell because, again, we're working with a coven sister that we're trying to help over a very hard time. We have different, our coven believes that every witch is different. Just like every woman is different. We all have different powers, we all have different abilities, and we all have different ways of expressing ourselves. So each girl that presents through in that circle really writes a poem of her own. She brings her own magic into that. We have a green witch, one of our girls. It's all about the herbs and all about the plants. I tend to be a dream witch, and I tend to be a zodiac witch. I'm really good with the signs. But anytime we present in our circle, it has to rhyme. And that reason is because we're not just speaking to each other, we're speaking to spirits. And it's been, and it's a handed down tradition. Like I said, I come from a really long line of witches, and they even, when we cook, practical magic, when you're in the kitchen and you're cooking and you're singing a song, you're casting a spell, you're casting a spell onto your food. Or I'm a knitter. I do a lot of knitting and crocheting and spinning. So I will say little spell prayers if I'm making something for somebody I love. And I love everybody, but I mean, if it's something really special, you imbue yourself into that object, and then you send your love. And we, at least my group and my family, have always done it through poetry. It's always rhymed. So that's so important. And you think about it every day. My grandma told me when I was a little girl, she's from Scotland, and she said, when you get up in the morning and you walk out your door, everything that you do is a spell. Every word that you say to somebody can affect the rest of their lives. So think about what comes out of your mouth.
Oh my,
fair
fair warning. There you go.
Beautifully, and you make somebody feel good, it'll come back to you.
Amen to that. Wow. Okay, Moss, jump in.
This just got me thinking with say traditions, and one of the traditions that in studying fantasy, I went back to Homer, who might have been a woman called is it Phantasma? Anyways, the tradition there was that it was sung and it was poetry, and it comes from this tradition of taking parts and mixing them up, and that tradition has continued to the modern day. Like there was a poem done recently about the assassination of JFK, using the same Homeric elements, and it's ritualized. There's this invocation asking for help from this divine source. And from that Greek, that pantheistic tradition, that epic poetry continued through Europe, and then we have so many works of fiction. Paradise Lost comes from that tradition. Dante's Divine Comedy comes from that tradition. And that's it.
Okay, that's awesome. Thistle is a poem. Was that Amy's poem, Thistle? Or was that, whose poem is Thistle?
That was mine. Yeah, that was mine.
Okay, we have an interested person. They're wondering where they could buy it. So if you want to type into chat to everyone, let us know where we can. What?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's not published yet. So it's not in a collection yet. No, but thank you. My Facebook is easy. It's Josephine Lorey. And I have a website, which is Josephine Lorey Poet, all is one word. If somebody wants to contact me for a copy, I would gladly share that. I mean, not all of my poems. I only have 2 published collections to date, and then I have publications in a number of different anthologies and collections, but that one's not published yet.
Wow, that sounds like we're going to need another collection, Josephine.
There's one on the way. Actually, there's more than one on the way right now. Which is
there you go. There you go. And so, yeah, if you could type that into the chat to everybody, your website, that'd be great. So as we know, spell casting and poetry have one thing in common, that's intention. And I think that you guys have talked a little bit about a couple of things, but what would be your response to, how do you think the focus of your intention works differently between spell casting and poetry, or would you say it's more the same thing?
Should I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure.
I don't
Go
think
ahead, Ron.
Moss knows he's on.
Yeah, he's on.
Oh, I'm sorry. As an author of a science fiction book, and by the way, Moss, I'm a major Tolkien fan. I mean, he's really kind of who made me an author. And I'm gonna be smart too. That's my book. I think that the influence that we give out, I really do think it's life changing. My favorite poem is by Edgar Allan Poe. It's called Annabel Lee. I tend to like dark stuff. I tend to like digging into the side where most people are afraid. And it's a pretty long poem, but it amazes me, and it's always amazed me, even as a child, how reading and how writing can change a person's life. So as a science fiction, and I'm not a poet, but after talking to these young ladies, I can't wait to buy some of your books because that's absolutely wonderful. Josephine, you know I'm buying your stuff. And Amy, I think you and I should be best friends.
I would like that. That would be good.
Yeah, I looked at your book and said, I got to get on. Is it on Amazon?
It is, yeah. And it's
Guess
only...
you know what I'm buying today.
Well, thank you.
But that was my spiel.
Yeah, if I could jump in there too, just to bounce off of that, Annabel Lee was probably still is my favorite poem of all time. It was also my favorite poem as a kid, and I loved it. And honestly, I'm also tend to be drawn to the darker stuff for reading and for writing. There's so much to look at there. But what I always loved with Annabel Lee was it had that repetition, it had that rhyme, and it was easy to start memorizing it. Like you read it enough times, and before you know it, it's kind of ingrained in your mind. And as a kid, I did have it memorized. And I think that's what I really love about this kind of crossover between the spell casting and between poetry, is that the lines are pretty blurred. And that you could consider Annabel Lee to be a spell. You could consider it being like a love letter to someone that has left us. It could be either one, and it could totally go either way. But I think that memorization piece is really key, in that you don't have to have the book in front of you. It's in your brain. It becomes a part of you. And then you can just kind of recite it whenever you need it or whenever someone else needs it. And that's what I do love about like rhyming poetry, especially, is just this idea that it becomes part of you because it's easy to hang on to. But yeah, so I just wanted to throw that in there. Love Annabel Lee. Best poem.
My mother passed away not too long ago, and there's a poem by Robert Frost called Nothing Gold Can Stay. And it really helped me get through my mother's passing, because it was a spell and I was very depressed and it was rough. I mean, she was sick for a long time, and I kept repeating that spell to myself whenever I was looking out the window of the nursing home, and because things have to end. So I can't say how much that poem helped me through. And it was beautiful, because our passing is a beautiful thing. It can be a beautiful thing. So to say how much that would mean to me, and I kept repeating it, nature's first green is gold, her harvest is you to hold. We have this wonderful time on this planet, but I repeated that poem to myself when things were getting very, very stressful and the family was very stressed out. I would go stand out in front of the nursing home, take a deep breath, and just repeat it and remind myself that this is part of life, that this is something we have to go through. So yeah, very much power of keeping you where you need to be. And the blurred lines, that was a spell. That was keeping me strong for my family so we could get through it.
Power poetry. Moss.
Poetry is very similar to, say, painting. And there's something that it's less sort of constructive structural thought and more visual, more closer to the gut and to who we really are. And the shamanic experience, I think, say the best art, the best poetry, that it gets back to the intention of healing, intention of getting us back to the center where we all are, and just, wiping the board clean and, just getting, don't worry about anything, right? Just get to the center. That, that's sort of, they say that the true power And it's the ability to disable, say, dictatorships, or enable people who are disenfranchised. I'll stop.
It's funny because I don't think of my poetry in terms of like the magic intentionally, but I am very open to the magic that I sense in nature. I'd like to read from the Cowichan series. So I was on Vancouver Island, and I don't know how great it'll look, but I came upon this little grove of very old growth forest, and it was very enticing. And I was tempted to walk inside, but I thought, what if I go in there and don't want to come out? What if I go in there and find the peace that I'm actually looking for, and I don't have to solve any of the problems that life has brought me? So I wrote a poem that I called Missing Woman. I could step off this path into the woods, use strands of silver from my hair as passage into fairy world. Inhale the richness of the earth, learn the call of birds, wash my feet in morning dew. And as light deepens toward the mystery, lay my body down in bowers of sweet moss.
Wow. Terrific. That's terrific.
There's nothing like bowers of sweet moss.
It to me, poets make me think of old time bards who used to travel around, or maybe troubadours. I don't know if they're the same or just different versions.
I think the troubadours were singers and the bards were speakers, but I think they were like two sides of the same coin, really.
Yeah, and they were storytellers.
Yes.
And poetry, I think it transforms us, and at the same time we transform it. I think that the room for transformation and healing and all of that is an extremely potent part of the poetry. So whether you're reading it or writing it, I think that it actually has transformational powers for us. At least that's been my experience when I'm writing or reading any poem, is that somehow it changes you, and you change it just by experiencing it. Have you had any experience with this kind of feeling with regard to poetry?
I'll chime in. Is it okay?
Oh, yes.
Okay. For a long time, I would look at Dante's Divine Comedy and just read it as is, and especially say it's cliche just to oh, I want to read about the Inferno and forget about the other stuff. And then recently I learned that you can read each of those three groups together and juxtapose these stanzas, compare them, and suddenly it transforms it and it brings it into something that is way more complex and interesting and disturbing. So that's something that happened recently with poetry. And and I just sort of took it for granted. Oh, this is an old poem. It has nothing to do with now. And it's, the technology they had back then, blah, blah, blah. And I've never seen anything like this.
And
so, Moss, can I ask you, sorry, I have a question for Moss.
Yeah.
So do you mean that instead of reading all of Inferno and then all of Purgatory and then all of Paradiso, you would read like one stanza from each? Is this how you mean it?
Yeah, the stanzas are connected. So the stanza, like the opening stanza, I'm 50-year-old in a forest.
Yes.
You go to Paradiso, the middle section, and it's talking. Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yes.
That was the test.
He's a
Okay,
teacher.
so that's right. The middle section, which starts talking, like stanza 1, is about a journey by boat.
Yes.
And then the final stanza, I think it talks about flying, but they're each sort of about some kind of journey.
Yes.
But just taken all together, it's just, yeah, it just transformed it. And I was like, I am dumb. I'm dumbfounded.
It is a journey. Yes.
Oh, totally.
We had a question, Rowan, about where do you find the Witcher rules?
I was taught it by my grandmother, but I know that you probably can find it online. I mean, I'm trying to think of the first time. I mean, I was taught it to read it by my grandmother, by the rule, but I'm pretty sure you can find it online. It's just called the Wiccan Reed, R-E-D-E. Let me look on online really quick.
The Wiccan Reed, R-E-A-D?
R-E-D-E, the Wiccan Reed.
Oh, R-E-D-E.
Yeah.
Okay. The Wiccan Reed.
It's been around a little while.
Okay. Well, I didn't know that. That was something new for me. Amy, I wanted to ask you about your botanical and sympathetic interest in magic and the different types of magic. So just briefly, when you have your poem that you wrote, I'm sorry, I forgot the name. Was it Noxious?
Yes, that was the anagram.
So when you wrote that poem, did you think of it as magical?
You know what, I did, and I think part of that was that I thought of it as magical and kind of like magical realism, maybe more than anything, partly because with these wildflowers, so they're called creeping bellflowers, but the other name for them is creeping zombie weed. And for me, as soon as you bring like an undead zombie kind of being in, it has to get magical. And that's like I was saying earlier, the language of this article is just all about like undeadness. And the resiliency of these little flowers that are beautiful, but so poisonous to all other plant life. That for me, when I read it, I didn't read this article with the intention of writing a poem from it, but yet I'm sure everyone else on the panel gets this. You get moments where it's like the language here is too good to not do something with it. Like the person that wrote this article was clearly working with some kind of magic realism lens as well. So yeah, to answer the question, I don't know that I made it magical so much as the language to start with was magical. And I made the decision to use that language that was already there instead of trying to write about this in a way that was imposing my own language onto it. And I credited the article at the end of the book to just say this is an anagram. The words came from here. I didn't come up with them. I just put them in this order. But I have to think, not to totally impose my vision on it, but I have to think that the author of that article had something magical in mind as well when they wrote that.
So it sounds like you were transformed.
A little bit. Well, and I was thinking about kind of moving away from the botanicals a little bit. I was thinking about poetry as transformation, and Rowan, what you were saying before, that Robert Frost poem. And I think one for me that I've gone back to over the years, I've had it taped on my bedroom wall since I was like 13, is Wild Geese by Mary Oliver. It's just one where, no, it's so good. Like, and
okay, we have to share this one. What's it called?
I can put it, Wild Geese. It's by Mary Oliver.
Are you sure we're not sisters?
I think we might have. I think that's totally possible. I've always wanted another sister, so I'll say go ahead. But that poem for me has just always been one that anytime that I'm struggling or anytime that there's things that feel insurmountable, that's a poem that I've always gone back to. And every time I read it, it's a different line in it that brings me comfort every time, but there's always something. So that kind of becomes an incantation, and I have it on my wall so that I see it every day. And Mary Oliver passed away, I think, a year or two ago. But this is the poem of hers for me that just always sticks with me. There's this line about... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you were going to say it's a line about...
Yeah, I was going to say there's one line, and she just says, like, you just have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. And it all just gives me goosebumps. I love it.
Wow.
Yeah. But yeah, Jennifer, sorry, I cut you off before. You were going to say
No,
something.
no, it's good. It's good. I was I wanted to hear what you had to say, and it's all these wonderful quotes of poems are transforming us as we speak. So it's awesome. Moss, go ahead.
I heard incantation, and I just had to chime in that's that once again, enchantment. There's the relation, the chant, the cant, and the cantos. It's song, it's singing, breath. There we go.
I also think that to talk about transformation, I think that as human beings, the better educated we are, and the more we open our minds up to things, the more beautiful the world is. And for me, poetry is kind of like a literal drug that helps me. I mean, when I read a poem, we'll use Annabelle Lee just because we've used it already. It makes me think of things differently. It makes me see the world a little bit differently than I would have normally seen it. It's like photography. I could look at a dog and I would see a dog, but a photographer could take the same picture, that same dog, and see something different in it. And I find that to be very magical. And poetry, you know, it takes sometimes the most mundane things and turns it into something mind-blowing.
True enough. True enough. Josephine.
Thank you. Everything that you're saying reminded me of another poem that I would like to share from. And Rowan, you talking about photography right there was just cueing. It's almost as if you were reading my mind. So I was visiting a friend who lives in Qualicum on Vancouver Island, and I took some photographs of her garden, and it was enchanting. But right beyond the garden, behind the garden, was a wild tangle of land. And I think it was a thoroughfare at one point for a train or something. So I wrote this poem called Untamed, and I wrote it for the oldest of my 3 children. Untamed. You inhabit the untamed spaces outside the circle of this garden, past black-stemmed bamboo and Cercis canadensis, whose heart-shaped leaves cash a wind chime which tinkles as I pass. You are summoned by unseen birdsong, just past creamy lilies dotted with dew, past purple clematis, which, like Icarus, reach to touch the sun, past orderly fern, astilbe, potted thyme, beyond paving stone path recessed in twilight lawn. You are bramble, exposed roots, dips and falls of new brown earth, timbered scent of deep-made soil. You pull me out of comfort beyond clarity of morning. You wait and whisper to me from the wild spaces outside the circle of this garden.
Wow. Just magical.
Boy, I
Well,
can feel my Amazon credit card burning up right now.
So I want to thank you guys, because guess what? We're like at the 10-minute mark here. So it went really quickly. It was a lot of fun, and I want to say thank you to everyone, Josephine, Rowan, Amy, Moss, for jumping in. And yeah, I look forward to further transformations. And yeah, we might just have to redo this panel next year. I think we could crack some more open. Okay. So thanks again for participating. Thank you everyone for joining and watching. And just a reminder, this will all be recorded and will be posted. Do give us some time though, as we've got 5 tracks of 3 days to post and upload and edit and whatnot. So it might take a day or 2 or a week or 2. And thank you so much for joining us for When Words Collide, and stay home, stay safe, and stay on Zoom. Okay. Thanks, guys. Have a great one.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.